Welcome to the studio review for chapter 10 on functions. We are going to write a couple of functions here that are going to help us accomplish some simple operations with arrays of words. The first function is going to handle just one small job where we're going to reverse the characters in a string. We're then going to actually modify that same function so it can also handle digits in a number where we treat it as a string just so we can reverse the characters and then convert it back to a number. In the third part, we're going to write a second function that will actually allow us to reverse all of the elements in an array, but at the same time, make use of the first function we wrote to also reverse all of the characters on each element in the array. So this should be interesting because it's a good way to practice how to work together with multiple functions to accomplish something. Then there are some bonus missions where we will do a few operations with strings and do some calculations with the area of a rectangle. And we're going to build functions to handle executing the code that are reusable, and we can test them with multiple strings and multiple values here. Okay. Let's start at the top. We're going to go to our JavaScript projects repository and go to the functions and studio directories. So we'll come over here. I've already got this opened up. You can see there's a file here, studiofunctions.js. So that's the file I have open. We have a lot of comments here, just giving us the same instructions that you'll find in here, just telling us step by step what it is that we need to do. And this one does not have any sort of dependency. We're not doing user input or anything like that. So it's going to be very straightforward. We're just going to put all of our code in this file, and we will just use the node command to run the file in the console. All right, so the very first one, reversing characters. We've done this before where we have used split and join to take care of something like this, where there's an array method that's really useful. It will reverse elements in an array, but first we'd have to be able to split the string into an array in order to use it. So method chaining will come in hand here to where we can reduce the lines of code and just kind of do it all at once. All right, they even give us some sample strings for testing here if we want to use these. Let's go ahead and start this very first part in the code. Okay, so right below part 1 here, it tells us they want us to define the function as reverse characters. That's the name we should give it. First, we need the function keyword. This is what tells JavaScript we are about to define a function. It's going to be a block of code that you can execute anytime we call this function. So we'll give it a name, reverse characters. And then it says it takes one parameter, which will be the string to reverse. And a parameter is just a local variable that you create right here in the parentheses that can then be used inside the function and represent whatever that value is that's passed into the function when it's called. So in between the curly braces here is where we'll put the definition of our function. This is any lines of code that are meant to execute when the function is called. We need to, first just, it could be as simple as just returning the string and, reversing it, right? So we can use method chaining to first split it. And we'll just use an empty string there, which basically means just take every single character and make it a separate element in the new array. So this creates an array. Now on that array, we can reverse all of the elements, and then we can turn it back into a string by chaining on the join method and giving it an empty string. So it just will join them all together without putting any additional characters between them. Okay, so we can test this now. I'm going to add a line of code. I'm just going to call it test string, and I'm going to call it supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I don't know if I'm spelling this part correctly, but we're going to go with it. Okay, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And we'll go ahead and log this so we can see some sort of result in the console. I'm going to call the function and pass in our test string. So again, when you use the name of the function and you use the parentheses, that calls the function. It says, go execute this function. And if the function returns a value, then that value is what this evaluates to. And that's what we're going to be printing, is the return value from the function. So that will be, this part right here. And so we should see that in the console. So let's go ahead and do it. Node studio functions.js, and I just let autocomplete. There you go. Okay, and we see this very long word in reverse. So this is working. We have a way to reverse our characters of a single string. So that's great. However, we actually want to do the second part with reversing digits. What if we pass a number? They give us a little bit of a tip here that we can use the type of keyword to check the type of the parameter, whatever arguments passed in for that parameter, to see whether it's a string or a number. And then if it's a string, we're just going to do it like we did before. But if it's a number, we have to convert it to a string in order to reverse the characters, and then convert it back into a number. And we'll return a number instead of a string. And then we're going to want to make sure to test it both ways. Make sure it works. It still works for a string, but it also works for numbers. So let's come up here, and I'm just going to modify my code and add a little bit more. What I would like to do, we're going to save this for later. I'm going to first just come up with some sort of way to tell whether it's a number or not. And I'm going to store that in a variable because we kind of need it for two different things. So I'm going to create a Boolean variable that just says, type of string equals number. So this might look strange to read, and we could put parentheses around it like this if it helps you read it, but they're not necessary. But this entire expression right here will evaluate to either true or false because we're using this equality operator. So either the type comes back as number or it doesn't. And that's going to determine whether this isNum variable will be true or false. And then we can make use of that and have some logic. So we'll start with using it here and say, if it's a number, we need to convert it, right? So we're going to change string and reassign it to a string that's been converted after we determine it's a number. Okay. Then we can, rather than returning this directly, because we don't know whether we need to return a string or a number yet, I'm going to actually assign this to a variable as well. I'm going to call it reversed string. And then we will go ahead and let it do the part where it takes it character by character. Now that we know it's a string, either a string was passed in or a number was passed in, and we've converted it to a string and saved that in the original variable name. Either way, we can go ahead and do that part here. Then we need to check one, again, and say, okay, if that was a number that we were dealing with, then we need to actually convert it back to a number. Otherwise, so we'll use an else, we can return reversed string as is. Okay. And you may have done this very differently. There are a lot of different ways you could go about putting together the logic for something like this. But the point is to come up with something that makes sense and, doesn't have too much unnecessary code. I think this is pretty straightforward, considering, we have to do two different things both before and after we're reversing it. So that's why I decided to go the route of just storing this Boolean variable, storing whether or not it's a number, and then I use it twice before and after to do different things. Okay, let's test it out. So down here, we're going to go ahead and test it with numbers. So I will say let test num equal, and I'm just going to come up with my own long number here. and we're going to go ahead and test. We're going to use our test string again, because we still need to make sure we've made changes to this code. Because we've made changes, we need to make sure it still works for a string. So we'll do just like we did here and pass in the test string, but then we'll do a second one. And this time I'm going to pass in the test number. Okay, let's see how this comes out. So I'm going to node studio functions again. Okay, so this is working. We got the same result on the string, and we also see that our number is now 987654321, the exact opposite of what it was before. It's in reverse. So this is working great. Part 3. This is where we want to actually make it so that our first function here, reverse characters, can be used over and over again for multiple elements within an array. So we're going to need a new function here. And let's see what they want us to call it. They didn't give us a name, so we can come up with our own name. I'm just going to call it reverse array. How's that? All right. So we'll create a function with the function keyword, reverse array, and pass in some sort of an array there. That's my local variable now that I can use in here to represent whatever array is passed in, no matter what it is. And we're going to need a result so that we can actually put everything back into a new array, and we'll return that once we have taken care of handling each of the elements one by one. So we'll say for and set up a classic for loop here. I'm going to declare I as a local variable. And I started out doing the normal 0. Here's the thing. If we want to reverse the entire array of elements, there are multiple ways to do this. The one that I'm choosing to do is to actually just iterate through the array in reverse. So I could say, let's start with array.length -1. So we get that very last index. And then we will continue looping until we get all the way down to 0, including 0. And then we make sure to use the decrementing symbol here so that it will actually reduce by 1 every time it iterates. And then we can go through, and in the result, we're going to push whatever element is at index I, but we don't want just that element to be pushed. We actually want all the characters reversed as well. So we can say, let's just reverse those characters, and then we'll pass in whatever the original element was from the array at that index. So every single time we do this, it's going to, get to a different one of the elements in the array, and we will reverse the characters in that item, whether it's a string or a number. And we're going to test all of these to make sure it works. Okay. And then we just want to make sure to return that value. We're going to return the result. So after all of those have been, one by one have been pushed into the array here, we'll return it. Now, I said there was more than one way to do this. Another way to approach it would have been to just use the reverse method that you can use with arrays and go ahead and reverse the entire array as it is first, without worrying about the characters, and then loop through forwards and reverse all the characters. And, that's when you would push it in. So you could have done it either way, perfectly valid. I just chose to do it by looping backwards and doing this all at once. Okay, let's test it out. We're going to send all 3 of those test arrays through. So I'm going to call reverse array and pass in array test1. And we'll get a result from that. I'm going to do the same thing with array test2 and array test3. So we can try all three of these arrays using that same function and see what results we get for each one. All right. Okay, so we see that the first one, apple, potato, and capitalized words, now has not only the elements reversed, but also all of the characters for each element have been reversed because we used our other method we wrote to handle that for us, reverse characters, and just gave it that one element at a time. So our numbers are all reversed, and even the one that had both strings and numbers, because we wrote it so that every time it loops around and it calls reverse characters, it starts with a new number or a new word. It treats them one by one, and so our logic, all this code was able to execute every single time, and treat each one. It's a whole new case, right? So that's the beauty of functions, that you write this code that you need to execute multiple times. And you can call this function as many times as you need to, and it will, do the job for you each time with different information. And you put something in, you get something out. These are the kinds of functions we're writing here. All right. So the bonus missions, there's a couple different things to do here. One is to have a function that takes a string and retrieves only the last character if the string is has a length of 3 or less, and then only the first 3 characters if it's got a length larger than 3. And then we're going to return a phrase in a template literal and use placeholders to put the original word and the fun phrase in there. Okay, so let's come back over the code. And we'll start with function get fun phrase. And we'll pass in some sort of string. And I'm going to identify, I'm going to figure out a way to get that substring that we need. And we need a little logic to do that. I'm going to go ahead and declare the variable without initializing it and just say let substring. Just so it exists, and now we can assign a value to it inside this conditional structure. So I'll say if the length of the string is less than or equal to 3, then we just want the last letter, right? So substring is going to equal string at whatever the index is that's, length minus 1. Otherwise, if the length is greater than 3, we're going to just take the first 3 letters. And so we can use slice for that and just say we want to go from 0 to 3 and get those 3 characters at 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so now that we have substring is going to either be this or it's going to be this, we can return this template literal and say we put the, and then I'm going to use single quotes around this and then use the placeholder to put the substring in. And then again, inside single quotes, I will use a placeholder to put the original string. And the reason I'm doing the single quotes is just so we can actually see those in the, as part of the sentence. I want them to be one of the characters in the sentence. It has nothing to do with the placeholder itself. Okay, let's test this. We're going to define a string. I'm going to call it let fun string, and we'll use the example they gave us in the instructions, functions rock. And then I'll have a second one, let short fun string, so we can test the logic the other way and say hi. So console.log get fun phrase, and we'll pass in fun string and get, and so we're just going to print whatever sentence comes back that's returned from this function. And then I'll do the same thing here with short fun string. And let's test it out. Okay, we put the fun in functions rock. For this one, because it was very short, it just says we put the I in high. It chose the last letter instead because this is the code that executed to set the substring. Okay, last one is the area of a rectangle being equal to length times width. Okay, we want a function that's going to take in the length and the width and return the area. And we're not going to have the function print it. We're just going to have it return that number. And then we can call it and test it by passing in something with, two different values. Well, let's do this part first, and then we'll get to the rest of it. So if I were to set this up initially, I'll just use the function keyword and call it get rectangle area. And then we'll say we're going to pass in the length and we're going to pass in the width. And we will return length times width because the calculation of the area of a rectangle is very easy. The function itself is not the hard part. It's just making sure that we are thinking about how we're going to use it. And that's in a second, it's going to get a little bit more interesting. So the area is, and then I will just use this to pass in, and let's just do 5 and 3. Okay, so I'm just writing a nice little sentence, and then I'm calling the function, passing in this length and width, and whatever number is returned from this is what's going to show up here where the placeholder is. Okay, so we can do that and test it out. Let's run it. The area is 15. Okay, 3 times 5 is 15. That's what we expect. But there's a couple more things here. It says if only one argument is passed to the function, the shape is a square. So we need to make sure our function can handle that. How do we make it so that it's going to handle only one? Well, the answer to that is that we need this second parameter to be optional. And the way we make it optional is to assign it a default value. In this case, a square just means that the length and the width are the same. So we can just assign it to length. Whatever's passed in here is the same value we'll give for this. And then our function still works as it is here by just multiplying the two together. So we can test this now. And I just noticed that this is supposed to actually have a centimeters squared here. So I'm going to do centimeters squared. Okay. Now let's go ahead and test this again. I'll test it with a single parameter so that it makes use of the default parameter by setting the width equal to whatever I pass in here. And we'll just pass in 8. All right. And we get the area is 64 centimeters squared. Perfect. Okay. That is all to the studio. We accomplished a lot. We wrote several functions and we tested them with different values. This is how you're going to get good at this, is just practicing things like this. So thanks for sticking with me, and I will see you in the next one.